This is DNCA America We Thank You story. My presentation is an homage to the unprecedented commitment of the executive and legislative branches of the U.S. government, the determination of the American people, and the missionary dedication of men and women from all over the world, united under the leadership of the American Near East Relief, NER for short from now on, to save millions of Armenians, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, Assyrians, Persians, and other minorities in the Near East. Following the Armenian genocide between 1915 and 1930. An unprecedented commitment and dedication of a nation that helped rescue and empower a generation of Armenian survivors between 1915 and 1930. January 1915, Talat Pasha, the Turkish Interior Minister, targets his victim by declaring there is room only for Turks in Turkey. January 13, 1915 issue of the New York Times. U.S. Ambassador Henry Morgenthau, April 24, American Embassy in Turkey is alarmed by the arrest and imprisonment of over 200 Armenian intellectuals. But one of the most important things, the American ambassador states and calls to organize to save the Armenians, and he says, destruction of the Armenian race in Turkey is progressing rapidly. Will you suggest to Cleveland Dodge, Charles Crane, John Mott, Rabbi Stephen Weiss, and others to form a committee to raise funds and provide means to save some of the Armenians? This was the call to save the Armenian nation. Americans to the rescue. U.S. Department of State, under the leadership of James Barton and Cleveland Dodge, founded the American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief in 1915, just 2 weeks after the State Department telegram. And in 1918, the Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief was renamed and was now called the American Committee for Relief in the Near East. And by act of Congress in 1919, the name of the American Committee was incorporated into as Near East Relief. Children were waiting in the snow, barefooted, just to be admission to the orphan city, the largest orphanage in the world, over 30,000 orphans. Somebody might ask, where are the parents? What happened to the parents? These were collected from the deserts and the mountains. What happened to their parents? Why did they come orphans? Near East Relief photos where it says, rescued girls in NER home. We see it today after 100 years as ISIS rapes women, kills children, beheads men. Just exactly that happened in 1915. NER ambulances start going from house to house to collect orphans or look after the sick and the ones who needed help. And these are the faces of the ones that didn't make it. This is a snapshot of 1923. Again, it's an American Near East Relief magazine, the New Near East. Look at the bar. Over 71% were Armenians, 13% Greek, miscellaneous 11, Syrian 1.9, Syrians at that time were also Lebanese, Assyrians 1.4, Jews less than 1%. What happened to why is the bar larger than anybody else? Yes, it was World War I. There was a lot of killing. It was World War. But why is it that high? Three consecutive US presidents and their families appealed to help Armenians survive. President Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge. Show me any goal that has lasted 15 consecutive years to save any people around the world. Proclamation by President Woodrow Wilson, President Harding appeals, and President Coolidge announces the Golden Rule Sunday, where American citizens were encouraged to eat regular orphanage food and donate their lavish dinner difference for the Armenian orphans. The Star of Near East Relief became the Hope. A campaign, poster campaign to raise $30 million started. But the posters were not just an artistic expression. That real raped Armenian mother was really there. And here is her photo with the kid on her back. This is not an Armenian nationalistic poster or magazine. This is pure American poster. Look at these ones. You won't let me starve, will you? I am little Shushan from Armenia. My home has been destroyed. Father was taken away. Mother starved because she gave me all the food. I am so hungry and cold. Thousands of other children are hungry too. Another poster. And look at this one. Uncle Sam looking after Armenia and Syria. How relevant it is after 100 years. The same thing. Liberty bonds were issued, and they became a symbol of patriotic duty to raise funds. Even the Statue of Liberty changed her torch and got a sword, and she said, "They shall not perish. The life of an Armenian child is in your hands. And if need be, I will wrap it with the American flag." Stamps were issued to raise funds. But look at this one. Uncle Sam protecting Armenian orphans on the plains of Ararat. In the background, ruined Armenian church and the mountain of Ararat. Charlie Chaplin recognized Coogan right from the beginning, and he played the kid with him. Jackie Coogan, the 10-year-old child, he wanted to raise over $1 million from condensed milk, collecting condensed milk, going from one state to another, riding on trains, until starting all the way from the west coast all the way to the east to collect condensed milk. And part of it here with the Kiwanis in Los Angeles. Hollywood stars, the Clooneys of the day, they got together. Golden Rule Sunday dinner to raise funds. Motion pictures were made, Ravished Armenia, and even Alice in Wonderland, the children's story, the wonderful Alice in Wonderland, became a movie to raise funds. Here we see Alice in Armenia feeding Armenian children. But it was not good enough just to collect the kids and save them. You have to sustain the campaign. Between 1919 and 20, an average of 333,000 people were fed. Between 1915 and 1930, the original $30 million campaign got almost quadrupled to around $120 million, which is the equivalent of $3 billion in today's money. Over 132,556 Armenian children in different places around the Middle East were saved. It was a logistical challenge. They had to use camels, American Near East Relief to move. Clothing, used clothing that American citizens sent over. Ships had to be loaded with flour and helping blankets and material. Michigan helped out loading 12 carloads of used clothing to send over. Secretary of Navy in San Francisco, 3,820,000 pounds of clothing. It wasn't just the presidents, the governments, the governors. They involved the kids. This magazine, June 1921, earning in America to give in Armenia. They sold lemonade, fudge, popcorn, peanuts to raise funds. It was a national American philanthropy all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast and from the North to the South. Look at this one. Children with disabilities lined up with their crutches to donate for their NER. They're holding their piggy banks in their hand. How many children do you see today for any cause to line up to do this? Something really bad must have happened. Mayor Edwin Brown of Seattle, after he donated his clothes to the Near East Relief, he went back with a barrel. From the smallest to the elderly, we're working. Near East Relief volunteers, over 1,000 of them, became foster parents. This one picture is 850 orphans. Where are the parents? What happened to the parents? Did they just vanish? First ladies, Wilson, Harding, adopted Armenian orphans by supporting coupon books. $60 will adopt a kid for 1 year. And then the other phase was the healing phase. In Gyumri, today in Yerevan, right by the Russian air base, over 250 buildings were donated by the Armenian government to Near East Relief. And one of them was turned into a hospital. As the children walked into the desert, they acquired trachoma. Trachoma is the eye disease where it leads to blindness if it's not taken care of. And in order to do that, they had to open the eyelid and scrape inside the eyelid. 30,000 of them, because they were sleeping in one bed, 4 or 5 children. There's no space. They were closing, close by. Have you ever seen a line of kids lined up to be treated in your whole life? Without American medicine, these children would have been blind now. Many of them did. It was too late for them. But these ones survived. I'm going to show that picture again. Look at the line of kids lined up just to go to the trachoma hospital, led by American doctors, so their eyes were scraped to save them from blindness. American Women Hospital, doctors, volunteers. They couldn't serve in the US Army then as women. They volunteered and they took care of that hospital in Gyumri and in Smyrna and in Lebanon and in Syria. And this is Dr. Mabel Elliott, who was running the hospital in Gyumri. A ward in one of the 36 Near East Relief hospitals. There were not enough nurses, so American doctors trained young Armenian girls to provide as assistance and became an army against the diseases. Hope and courage. They were supposed to play the toddlers. They encouraged the younger ones, the elder ones, when they became 16, 17, teenagers, to get married and bring up families. They also had to empower them, have self-reliance. A mission went beyond just relief. The orphans were provided with vocational skills. They taught them how to do agriculture, farming, masonry, carpentry, mechanics, shoemaking, shipbuilding, bakery, tailoring, nursing, barbering, so they could survive. Boys were knitting their own winter socks. The girls were trained on American sewing machinery, Singer. shoemaking, bookbinding, relearning embroidery and Armenian tradition so that they don't forget their culture, metalworking and forging. American tractors were sent to Armenia under the Bolshevik and Soviet rule until 1927. As you know, the Bolsheviks took over that area in 1917. So for 10 years, American kept on serving under the Russian by introducing American farming methods and tractors. They taught them the sense of accomplishment by planting their own potatoes, their own cabbages, and feeding their own selves. But they also taught them how to love. As the older carpenter boys in another orphanage, they made these wooden tricycles so that the little ones can play with. A gift of gratitude. 1,400 orphans in Ghazir in Lebanon, saved by the Near East Relief under the American flag. This is the same orphanage where a few months back, the orphan rug, which was shown in the White House Visiting Center, this is where it was woven. And this is the factory where the girls are weaving the carpet, the rug. And as a gratitude to the American people and the president, they sent this rug to the White House. We see Calvin Coolidge and Dr. Finley, the Near East Relief, overseas. And this is the building that I have located where this carpet was shown off in Lebanon before being sent to the White House. Look at the windows where the 7 girls were hanging the rug. This is the building where it was hanging here. The 2 Armenian girls which wove that rug came to Pennsylvania, and they were showing how to work on a loom machine so that people would donate more money, and they were invited to the White House. And Mrs. Calvin Coolidge invited them and asked them if they wanted to become immigrant, and they said yes, and they stayed in the United States. So basically she took care of them as orphans. And one of them, I think it was 1986, she was the one who wove that rug. She's sitting in the White House on the rug which was shown only a few weeks back. In 1915, the Young Turks, led by Turkish Interior Minister, said there is only room for Turks in Turkey. Later on, with the Kemalist Turkey, December 1922, the Near East Relief New York Bureau received this message: Kemalist instruction, all Christians must evacuate Turkish territory, has caused general deportation from Anatolia into Aleppo. And Henry Justin Allen, governor of Kansas and later a senator, following Mustafa Kemal's order, he evacuated all the Christian children out of Anatolia. So basically, American real estate, American hospital, missionaries, and the Armenian population, whatever was left off, and the Jews and the Assyrians and the Lebanese Arabs were kicked out of Turkey. This is the map of Turkey, current map of Turkey. And this Near East Relief map shows where they had to evacuate every orphan out. That's how they ended up in Armenia and northern Iran, and then into Syria and Jordan and Palestine, and Greece and Bulgaria on the other side. So the American lost their assets, millions of dollars, as well as like the Armenian population did. This is moving the children in Istanbul out of Turkey. Walking into the deserts on boxes around mules, so they could walk the 500 mile instead of Turkey allowing them to take a boat for less than 100 miles away. They forced them to, walk about 500 miles. Near East Relief, the Americans spearheaded this organization, but then the world as well joined. Here we see Australasian Orphanage in Antilles. They traveled 8,800 miles away to save the Armenians in Lebanon under the Australian flag. And today, the Catholicosat of Holy See of Cilicia, CIS, is the exact place where that orphanage was. Another orphanage, Bird's Nest, in Sidon, south of Lebanon. This is how it looks today. They're putting the plates on the floor so they can sit and eat. They rented this house, this castle, I should say. And now this is how it looks. Orphanage in Nahr Ibrahim, Lebanon, run by Professor Stanley Kerr. After having their own villas and houses and servants and horses and everything else, their husbands are killed, slaughtered by axes, by sword, and ended up living in these shacks like in Syria and Lebanon and Jordan and around the world. They brought smiles to their little faces. This is part of the 30,000 orphans in Gyumri in Armenia. Look at the American flag. Just imagine how much manpower and organization did Near East Relief had the vision so they can feed these kids 3 times a day. They give them clothing, shoes, teaching them vocational schools so they could survive, and at the same time looking after their health. While the Americans were running such orphanages, Turkey was doing something else. They were collecting Armenian orphans, ages boys and girls, 3 to 14-year-old, bringing them to a French college in Lebanon under the auspices of Jemal Pasha and Khalideh Adib Arivar to Turkify them. They changing their name from Hagop and Vartan into Ahmad and Muhammad, and from Shushan into Khadija, and forcing them, if they spoke any Armenian words, they would beat them under their soles with their iron rods, the falacha. That was their punishment. The boys were circumcised, they were forced to change their names, trained to become Ottoman soldiers. And right after the Turks lost the war, in 1918 November, the first arrivals were the American Red Cross and Near East Relief employees to take care of. Out of the 2,000 children that started in the Turkification process in Ain Tura, Lebanon, which exists still today, they were able to find 638 children. Stand by them a little longer. Look at this map. The dotted lines or arrows are where the money came from. And the solid lines are where it went. But just imagine, American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief, headquartered in New York, India, China, Japan, Thailand, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, Alaska, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, Panama Canal, Cuba, Mexico, they all send money so they would be sent. Even South Africa, Liberia. We're talking about 1915 to 1930. All these countries sent to save Armenian orphans. And if my grandmother was not saved by Near East Relief, I wouldn't even be here. It wasn't just an organization, it became a benchmark for the Marshall Plan, Truman's Point 4 program. The US Peace Corps is based on Near East Relief activities. The USAID and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, is based on Near East Relief formats. Countries like United States, Canada, Australia, Britain, Cuba, Switzerland, Denmark, France, China, Germany, Czech Republic, Sweden, Belgium, Greek, Philippines, South Korea, Japan, and Armenia and Russia all had offices. This is a British poster trying to help. Canadians, Western Canada's gift, flour to starving Armenians. These train rails started all the way from the north and went all the way to Louisiana so that they could be loaded with ships to go over to the Middle East. The Russians helped as well. The Pope blessed the Near East Relief and donated 550,000 liras at that time. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, Palestine welcomed thousands of Armenian refugees between 1915 and 1930 and gave them safe haven. But humanitarian dedicated workers, over 1,000 of them volunteers and employees, dedicated their lifestyles, but over 30 of them lost their life as well. Some of the Near East Relief volunteers received the Near East Relief Medal for faith and selfless service to humanity. 1915, NER, for faith and selfless service to humanity. And on the other side, the people that they helped. The NER was executed my grandfather was executed by hanging at the age of 45. And my father ended up in an orphanage in Antilias in Lebanon and was cared by the Near East Relief. I grew up with the unbelievable stories, constant reminders of the pain and the suffering of Armenians who lost everything to date. To date, a silent Holocaust haunts my generation. The helplessness of whole nation and the indifference of the world and its denial of what happened to my father and millions of others like him makes us feel like rape victims, violated, ashamed for not doing enough to stop it, ridiculed for making up stories, and blamed for provoking the rape. Dear Misak, your work showed me the courageous faces of the survivors, told me of a world that knew about the Armenian genocide, made me proud of the bold actions taken by my government to stop the suffering of the victims and the generosity and the compassion of countries and people who sacrificed their lives, their finances, and their political power to help a whole nation have a second chance. Your story gives me back my dignity as an Armenian American, and more importantly, gives me hope that there is a world out there who in silence is working on honoring the history of my people and my ancestors. And by closing, the question today for us is how to maintain the integrity of our historical tragedy. We don't have to prove to anybody that the Armenian genocide happened. The world already knew it. The American government, with their archive and record, knows that. The missionaries witnessed that. American people knew that. Children knew that. They were there. They lived it through the NER campaigns to raise funds for the victims. They lived it through their kindnesses and sacrifices and prayers and tears. The US government got heavily involved in the act of philanthropy as it was happening because its official representatives, its State Department, and its very own Near East Relief workers and the President witnessed the systematic annihilation of the Armenian people by the hands of the Turkish government and its agents, recognized it as the annihilation and called it in the State Department records, destruction of the Armenian race. Doesn't that mean genocide? In the words of multi-award winner Robert Fisk of the British The Independent, the vital element that was missing in those atrocious arguments was not the identification of the victims, but the comprehension that the victims were human beings just like you and me. If there's a message that will last for hundreds of years, perhaps it has to be focused on the absolute conviction that these people were our people. The fathers and the mothers and the brothers and the sisters were our fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters. We as a people should be able to help the American, the British, the Turkish, the Israeli, and the Australian governments recognize themselves in the orphans of the Armenian genocide. victims and survivors of the first Holocaust of the 20th century. Thank you.